"Get your dirty hands off that car, boy." The voice cut through the evening air like a blade. Heads turned up and down the upscale Washington, D.C. street, heels paused mid-step, and conversations fell silent. Officer Bradley Townsend slammed his patrol car door and marched across the sidewalk, eyes locked on the tall man in the tailored suit standing beside a sleek black sedan. Dr. Jonathan Hayes had just stepped out, adjusting his tie as if preparing for a meeting, but before he could close the door behind him, Townsend's hand crashed into his shoulder. The shove sent him hard against the cool metal of his own vehicle, palms spread wide across the polished hood. The sound echoed between the brick townhouses, drawing curious pedestrians closer. "Sealing cars in broad daylight now?" Townsend sneered, twisting Hayes's arm higher than necessary. "Bold move for this neighborhood." Phones appeared instantly. Screens lit up as strangers began filming, capturing every second of the unfolding humiliation. Hayes's watch flashed in, the sun as his hands were forced flat on the hood, his expression steady but unshaken. He had been here before. Not this exact street, not this exact moment, but this exact assumption. "Officer," Hayes said evenly, his voice calm, precise, almost rehearsed. "I own this vehicle." Townsend barked out a laugh, loud and mocking, designed for the audience now gathering in a semicircle. "Right, and I'm the director of the FBI. Hands behind your head now." The crowd stirred. A woman in business clothes shook her head, muttering, "This is ridiculous." An elderly man leaned on his cane, muttering, "Shameful." Yet Townsend basked in it, puffing his chest out as though he were the star of a stage play. Every word, every shove was a performance meant to humiliate, to remind everyone watching exactly who held the badge and the power. Have you ever watched someone's dignity get stripped away in public? The narrator's voice would cut in if this were a film, because in that moment, dignity wasn't just slipping away, it was being ripped out of Hayes's hands. And yet, beneath his calm eyes was something Townsend couldn't see. Patience. Calculation. A truth waiting for its stage. What happens next will shatter everything you think about power and justice. The alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., soft but insistent. Jonathan Hayes reached over, silenced it, and sat up slowly. The first rays of sun cut through the blinds of his Virginia home, painting the room in a warm glow. The world outside was quiet, the kind of calm that never lasts. He moved through the hallway, every wall lined with family photographs. His wife Maria, laughing at a beach years ago, their 2 children on the first day of school, smiling awkwardly with backpacks too big for their shoulders, and sprinkled between the family moments, frames that hinted at something else, images of Hayes in sharp suits, shaking hands with men and women in power, the kind of photos that never make it to living room walls without reason. In the kitchen, the coffee machine gurgled. The smell of dark roast filled the air as Hayes set 2 mugs on the counter, one for himself, one ready for Maria when she woke. He scrolled through his phone briefly, then set it aside, preferring the morning news murmuring from the television. A reporter spoke about new pushes for police oversight, body camera mandates, and accountability measures. Hayes listened intently, his brow furrowing just slightly. He knew the story behind those words. He had read the numbers the public hadn't seen. Disparities, patterns, complaints swept aside. At the table, he adjusted his tie with the same precision he gave to every detail of his life. The tie clip gleamed under the light. Order mattered. To him. Preparation mattered. He carried himself with the discipline of a man used to responsibility, of someone whose daily choices rippled far beyond his own household. His phone buzzed with a message from Maria. "Don't work too late. Sarah's recital tomorrow?" He smiled faintly, typing back, leaving at 5:30. I wouldn't miss it. It was a promise he fully intended to keep. But as Hayes grabbed his briefcase and stepped toward the door, the weight of unseen files and unspoken battles followed him. Calm mornings had a way of turning into storms, and tonight would be no different. Jonathan Hayes sat in his corner office, the city skyline framed neatly behind him. The walls carried plaques, awards, framed commendations, though the nameplates were deliberately turned just slightly away from view. He flipped through a thick folder stamped Metropolitan Police Reform Initiative. Phase 2. Charts, graphs, complaint logs. Numbers that told stories of broken trust. Arrest disparities that spiked off the page. Entire precincts with complaint files piling up faster than they could be closed. He paused at a section highlighting traffic stop data. A single district, where nearly 80% of drug arrests involved black men, though the community's demographics told a far different story. Hayes closed his eyes briefly, letting the weight of it settle. He wasn't just reading statistics, he was staring at lives disrupted, careers derailed, families torn apart. His secretary knocked lightly. "Director, your 6 p.m. community. Engagement is confirmed. Downtown on 5th Street. Hayes nodded, tucking the file back into his briefcase. That meeting, quiet, anonymous, wasn't for cameras. It was part of a listening tour, a chance to hear directly from communities who lived with these numbers every day. Across town, Officer Bradley Townsend leaned back in the driver's seat of his patrol car, eyes on the road but attention fixed, only on the vehicles he wanted to see. His radio crackled with dispatch calls, disturbances, accidents, requests for backup. He ignored them all. Instead, he scanned for luxury sedans, SUVs with tinted glass, or cars that looked too nice for the drivers behind the wheel. 4 times that afternoon, he'd pulled someone over. 4 times, the driver was black. 4 times, he walked away without issuing a single ticket, only after long searches and aggressive questioning. To Townsend, that was real police work. The other calls, paper pushers could handle those. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Hayes spent his day searching for ways to rein in misconduct and restore faith in law enforcement. Townsend spent his day feeding the very statistics Hayes was trying to change. One man carried a quiet mission of reform in the nation's highest offices. The other, bitter and unchecked, carried his prejudices on the streets. Their paths had not yet crossed, but the collision was inevitable, and the system itself was about to be tested. At exactly 5:30 p.m., Jonathan Hayes closed his office door and walked out of headquarters with his briefcase in hand. He preferred driving his own vehicle for evenings like this. No motorcade, no flashing lights, no attention. Just a man in a suit headed to a quiet community meeting where his title would remain unspoken. The sun was starting to dip behind the buildings, washing downtown in amber light as his sedan rolled steadily toward 5th Street. His mind was already rehearsing talking points, listening first, speaking second, reminding himself that trust wasn't built in speeches but in presence. Across town, Officer Bradley Townsend was halfway through a sluggish patrol shift. His mood, as usual, soured with every dispatch crackling across the radio. Petty calls, neighborhood complaints, nothing worth his time. Then came the one he was waiting for. Unit 47. Possible theft in progress. Upscale vehicle, 5th Street. Townsend sat up, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Finally, he flicked on his lights, not the siren, just enough to cut traffic, and turned his cruiser sharply toward the address. 5th Street was one of his favorite beats. Wealthy blocks where, in his eyes, certain people always stood out. The kind of street where a suit and a nice car didn't fit if the driver's skin didn't match the neighborhood. Hayes parked neatly outside the community center, 15 minutes early as always. He adjusted his tie, checked his watch, and reached for the folder in his briefcase. No cameras, no press, just a small group waiting to talk about trust and accountability. He straightened, preparing to step inside. That's when Townsend saw him. A polished black sedan. A man in a tailored suit. Confident stance, calm movements, skin color that in Townsend's eyes didn't belong here. Instantly, suspicion hardened. Into certainty. Too smooth, too comfortable. Has to be trouble. Hayes closed his car door gently, completely unaware that a patrol car had stopped across the street. Townsend's eyes narrowed, predatory focus locked on his target. The officer's hand brushed his belt, chest swelling with the rush of adrenaline he always felt when a catch was about to unfold. The air between them was still for just a moment, but the outcome was already written. The reformer and the Resistor were on the same block now, and the inevitable clash was only steps away. Hands on the car, now. The command was sharp, loud enough for half the block to hear. Before Jonathan Hayes could respond, Officer Bradley Townsend's hand slammed into his shoulder, spinning him and forcing him hard against the sleek black sedan. The metallic thud echoed across 5th Street, and heads turned instantly. Hayes's palms pressed flat against the hood, his posture controlled despite the sting in his arm. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding. This is my vehicle." Townsend let out a laugh that was more performance than reaction. "Your vehicle? Let me guess. Doctor? Lawyer? Senator?" His voice dripped with sarcasm, carrying easily to the gathering crowd. He bent closer to Hayes's ear. "Or maybe just another thief in a borrowed suit." Hayes didn't flinch. "I work for the federal government," he replied, his tone calm but firm. That only fueled Townsend's mockery. He yanked the wallet from Hayes's jacket pocket, holding it high like a trophy. "Federal government, huh? Post office janitor, maybe? Let's see what story the magic ID tells." He flipped it open dramatically, reading aloud with exaggerated disbelief. "Dr. Jonathan E. Hayes." "Ooh, doctor, real impressive." He turned it toward the crowd, eyes rolling. "Probably printed this off the internet." Gasps rippled through the bystanders. Phones were already raised, cameras rolling. A woman in a business suit muttered, "This doesn't look right." A teenager whispered to her friend, "I'm getting all of this." Hayes kept his voice steady. "You can verify everything through your system. Don't tell me how to do my job," Townsend snapped, shoving Hayes harder against the hood. "You people think you can just stroll into neighborhoods like this and nobody notices. Well, I noticed." More pedestrians gathered, their murmurs mixing with the hum of traffic. Every second the circle widened, every angle of the humiliation caught on glowing screens. That's when another patrol car pulled up. Officer Rodriguez stepped out, adjusting his belt, eyes immediately narrowing at the scene. Something about the man pinned against the car caught his attention. The composure, the sharp suit, the watch gleaming under the streetlights. Hayes didn't look or act like any suspect Rodriguez had ever dealt with. "What's the situation, Brad?" Rodriguez asked carefully. "Got ourselves a bold car thief," Townsend announced proudly, loud enough for the crowd. "Caught him red-handed, about to boost this Mercedes." Rodriguez hesitated, studying Hayes's calm expression and clipped tone. Doubt prickled in his chest, but he said nothing. The badge on Townsend's chest carried weight, and calling him out here, in front of everyone, could backfire. Townsend straightened, feeding off the crowd's attention. Each shove, each sneer was bigger than the last. What had begun as a stop was now a spectacle, and humiliation was the main event. The stakes weren't just high for Hayes, they were climbing for every single person watching. Townsend yanked the driver's side door open without asking, his movements sharp and deliberate. Papers from Hayes's briefcase slid off the seat, scattering across the pavement. He ignored them, rooting through the interior with exaggerated flair. Every toss of a folder or shove of an armrest meant to show the crowd that he was working. "Always the same story," he said loudly, his voice pitched for maximum effect. "Big car, fancy clothes, but underneath, just another hustler trying to play innocent." From the corner of his belt, his fingers slipped into a pouch, palming a small plastic baggie filled with white powder. Townsend moved with the ease of practice. He crouched slightly, shielding his hands from the nearest phone cameras, then slid the bag neatly under the driver's seat. The motion was quick, rehearsed, almost invisible, except to him. Moments later, he straightened, his face lighting up in a mock look of discovery. "Well, well, well," he bellowed, pulling the baggie into view and holding it high like a fisherman, showing off a catch. "What do we have here, folks?" He shook it in the fading sunlight so every camera caught the glint. "Cocaine, felony possession, with intent to distribute, no doubt." The crowd gasped. A woman called out, "That's impossible. He just got out of the car." Another voice shouted, "We saw what you did." Hayes turned toward the nearest phone lens, his voice calm but ringing with conviction. "That substance is not mine, and this officer knows exactly where it came from." His eyes burned with steady fire, his tone unshaken despite the spectacle unfolding around him. "Save it," Townsend barked, smirking as though he'd scored a personal victory. "They all say it isn't theirs, but guess what? Drugs don't just fall from the sky into Mercedes-Benz vehicles." He pivoted toward the crowd. "See, this is why you need real police out here, catching career criminals before they poison the community." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably beside him, his eyes darting from the baggie to Hayes to the buzzing phones in every hand. Something about the whole scene screamed wrong, but the circus was moving too fast for him to stop it. Townsend reached for his cuffs with relish, snapping one around Hayes's wrist. The metallic click carried down the block like a gunshot. The second cuff followed just as quickly, sealing the moment. "Game over, Professor," Townsend sneered, shoving Hayes toward the cruiser. "Welcome to the real world." The crowd's protests rose into a chorus, but Townsend fed on it like oxygen. The door slammed shut, and Hayes disappeared behind tinted glass. The car rolled forward, carrying him away. Not to safety, but deeper into a storm that was only beginning. The doors of the precinct swung open as Townsend strutted inside, his chest puffed out like a prizefighter after a knockout. He yanked Hayes along by the arm, making sure everyone in the booking area noticed. "Got ourselves a real prize tonight, boys," he announced to anyone within earshot. "Car thief with a drug habit and a taste for expensive suits. Thought he could outsmart the streets, but not on my watch." A few officers glanced up, some amused, others indifferent. Hayes walked with steady composure, not fighting, not protesting, just watching. Every step was measured, every breath. Controlled at the fingerprinting station, Hayes spoke for the first time since entering the building. "I'd like to make my phone call now." Townsend smirked, gesturing with mock generosity. "By all means, Doctor. Call your dealer. Tell him to find a new corner." The desk sergeant handed over the phone with little thought. Hayes lifted. The receiver dialed from memory and waited. When the line connected, his words were quiet but precise. "This is Director Hayes. I am currently in custody at the 5th Precinct. Implement Protocol 7 immediately." The sergeant, who had been sipping coffee, nearly choked. His eyes darted up at Hayes, then down at the arrest report Townsend had shoved across the counter. He reread the name, the occupation field, Federal Law Enforcement. His face was drained of color. Townsend, oblivious, snatched the phone back. "Time's up, hotshot. Back to your cell." As he guided Hayes toward holding, the sergeant leaned toward a nearby officer, whispering urgently, "Get me the watch, Commander. Now, and clear a line for incoming calls." Outside, the night air filled with the low rumble of engines. Black SUVs with tinted windows turned onto the block, government plates catching the streetlights. Men and women in dark suits stepped out with practiced precision, their expressions grim, purposeful. They didn't move like curious onlookers, they moved like people on a mission. Inside, Townsend was still basking in his glory, replaying the arrest. For anyone who would listen, Smooth Operator thought he was untouchable. Well, tonight justice caught up to him. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that justice was already pulling into the parking lot, wearing federal badges and moving straight for him. Watch. Commander Peterson stood stiff behind his desk, a sheen of sweat already on his forehead. Across from him, 2 federal agents in dark suits flanked Deputy Director Sarah Carter, whose badge gleamed under the fluorescent light. Her voice was controlled, but there was ice in it. "Commander, I need the officer who made this arrest brought here immediately." The intercom crackled. "Townsend and Rodriguez to the watch commander's office." Townsend swaggered in, first still wearing his self-satisfied grin. "Sir, I assume you wanted a full rundown on my arrest tonight. Smooth takedown, luxury car, fake ID, and drugs to top it off. Textbook." Carter stepped forward before Peterson could speak, her eyes locked on Townsend, unblinking. "Officer Townsend, do you know who you arrested tonight?" Townsend smirked. "Some con man calling himself a doctor. Claimed he worked for the government." Her voice cut sharper. "That con man is my boss, FBI Director Jonathan Hayes." The words seemed to slam the air out of the room. Townsend's grin faltered, then vanished altogether. That's impossible. He was stealing a car. You found what you planted, Agent Morrison interrupted, sliding a tablet onto the desk. With a tap, the screen lit up, playing crisp footage from Townsend's own body camera. The video left no room for denial. His hand palming a baggie, slipping it under the seat, then pulling it out for show. Cut to civilian phone clips, 12 angles in total, all catching the same sleight of hand dot. The room went silent, except for the audio. Townsend's voice taunting, mocking, fabricating. Carter's voice rose, each word precise as a blade. You saw a black man in a suit and assumed criminal. You humiliated him in public. You planted evidence. And you arrested the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in this country. Peterson's face was ashen. Officer Townsend, you're suspended immediately. Badges and weapons. Now. Townsend's hands shook as he unpinned the metal shield from his chest and laid it on the desk. The weight of it seemed heavier than ever. His service weapon followed with a dull thud. Moments later, the door opened. Jonathan Hayes entered, flanked by agents, his cuffs already removed. His suit was rumpled, but his dignity was untouched. The balance of power shifted instantly. The hunted man was now revealed as the hunter, and Townsend's world had just collapsed. The FBI field office buzzed with the kind of urgency usually reserved for national security crises. Monitors flickered across the room. Agents hunched over. Keyboards, analysts stacking files that seemed to grow by the hour. At the center of it all stood Jonathan Hayes, no longer the man pinned against a car, but the director of the bureau commanding a full-scale investigation. On one table, a forensic technician carefully opened the evidence bag Townsend had waved like a trophy only hours earlier. Under the microscope, the truth was embarrassingly clear. Powdered sugar mixed with baking soda, the technician reported. Street value, about 50 cents. Certainly not cocaine. The finding went into the official record, another nail, in Townsend's coffin dot. At another station, a data analyst projected arrest records across 3 massive screens. Here's Townsend's pattern over the last 5 years, she explained. Numbers filled the monitors. 847 total arrests, 723 of them black males between the ages of 18 and 55. That's an 85% rate in a district that's only 31% black. Statistically, it's not just unlikely, it's targeted. Hayes's jaw tightened. Each line of data represented a human life disrupted. Cases dismissed for lack of evidence. Careers stalled. Families upended. Then came the flood of voices. Word of Townsend's suspension had spread quickly across community networks and social media. Victim testimonies poured in. Emails, calls. Even people walking into the field office lobby to give statements. A surgeon who'd been arrested outside his own hospital after a 16-hour shift. A professor pulled over more than a dozen times on his commute to campus. A father handcuffed in front of his young daughters because he fit a description. Each story matched the same pattern. Aggressive stops, flimsy charges, dignity stripped, away. Trust shattered. Agent Carter entered with a thick binder of new complaints, her expression grave. Sir, this isn't just about one officer. Townsend's misconduct exposes a deeper rot, systemic neglect, ignored complaints, and possibly other officers using the same playbook. Hayes glanced around the room. The chaos, the files, the statistics, the testimonies. It was overwhelming, but it was also an opportunity. What had started as one man's humiliation was expanding into something far bigger, the exposure of a broken system. And this time, the weight of federal authority was behind it. The interview room was sterile. Gray walls, a metal table, 2 chairs, and a camera humming softly in the corner. Townsend sat slouched in an orange jumpsuit, his hands trembling as he signed the waiver form. For the first time in years, he had no badge, no gun, no authority to lean on. Only fear. The door opened, and Jonathan Hayes stepped in, tailored suit crisp despite the chaos of the past 48 hours. He didn't sit right away. He stood across the table looking down at the man who had shoved him against his own car. His voice was calm, but it carried an edge that cut through the silence. "State your full name and former occupation for the record." Townsend swallowed hard. "Bradley James Townsend, former officer, 5th Precinct." His voice cracked on the word former. Hayes sat, folding his hands neatly on the table. "Mr. Townsend, do you understand why you're here today?" "Because I arrested you without knowing who you were," Townsend muttered. Hayes leaned forward slightly. "No, you're here because you systematically violated the civil rights of American citizens. My federal position is irrelevant. You would have done the same thing to a teacher, a janitor, or a student. Isn't that correct?" Townsend shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to the camera. I was just doing my job." "Your job," Hayes said evenly, sliding a folder across the table, "included planting this baggie under my seat. Forensics show it was powdered sugar and baking soda. Your fingerprints are all over it. 12 camera angles captured you palming it from your belt. Is that also just your job?" Silence hung heavy. Townsend finally whispered, Sometimes you have to make sure justice gets served. People slip through the cracks." Hayes's tone sharpened. "So you appointed yourself judge and jury, decided who was guilty based on skin color, then manufactured evidence to match your prejudice. How many times?" Townsend's shoulders sagged. "A few, maybe more than a few." "More than a few," Hayes repeated, each word deliberate. "Hundreds of lives disrupted, families destroyed. And you call that a mistake?" Townsend's composure cracked. "Look, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I can cooperate, I can name others, I can help you clean it up." Hayes's gaze was cold, unyielding. "Cooperation may lessen your sentence, but it won't erase the damage you've done, the lives you've scarred, the trust you've shattered." For the first time, Townsend lowered his head, not in defiance but in defeat. Hayes rose, buttoning his jacket. His final words were measured, unforgiving. "Justice delayed has caught up with you, Mr. Townsend, and it will not let you go." The federal courtroom was packed, every seat filled with victims, reporters, and community leaders who had waited years for this moment. At the front, Judge Patricia Williams adjusted her glasses and looked down at the defendant. "Mr. Townsend," she began, her voice steady but cutting, "in 3 decades on this bench, I have rarely seen such a consistent pattern of abuse. For 5 years, you engaged in racial profiling, planted evidence, fabricated charges, and violated the constitutional rights of the very citizens you swore to protect." Townsend sat hunched at the defense table, his orange jumpsuit a stark reminder of how far he had fallen. His attorney had entered guilty pleas to multiple federal felonies, civil rights violations, evidence tampering, conspiracy under color of law. Judge Williams continued, "You will serve 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will pay $347,000 in restitution to your documented victims, and you are permanently barred from ever holding a law enforcement position again." Gasps of relief and soft applause rippled through the gallery. Hayes, seated in the front row, remained stoic, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Around him, victims who had once been humiliated now witnessed justice delivered at last. Weeks after the sentencing, Jonathan Hayes sat before a packed congressional chamber. Cameras lined the back wall, microphones crowded the desk in front of him. His testimony was steady, clear, and unflinching. He described what had happened on that Washington street. But more importantly, he detailed the patterns uncovered afterward, the statistics, the testimonies, the undeniable evidence of systemic abuse. Lawmakers shifted uneasily in their seats. As he spoke of hundreds of wrongful stops, families scarred, and communities stripped of trust, his words carried weight, not because of his title, but because they were backed by proof. Within months, the Federal Police Accountability Act passed. It required body cameras for all departments receiving federal funding, created civilian oversight boards with real authority, and mandated bias recognition training for officers nationwide. Departments that failed to comply faced the loss of grants and federal support. The ripple effects were immediate. In city after city, reforms began reshaping everyday policing. Body camera compliance surged. Oversight boards gained traction. Training academies rewrote their curricula to include not just tactics, but ethics and cultural competency. Back in Washington, Officer Rodriguez, the one who had hesitated that night, who had seen something wrong but lacked the courage to intervene, was promoted. Now a training supervisor, he led courses on bias recognition and officer accountability. His testimony from that night turned into a case study for recruits. And across the country, courtrooms began overturning wrongful convictions. Linked to Townsend's arrests, lives that had been derailed started to be pieced back together. College degrees resumed, careers restarted, families reunited. The story of one corrupt officer had sparked something larger, a reckoning that reached beyond Washington and into precincts nationwide. The damage was deep, but the reforms promised something new, the chance to rebuild trust one step at a time. 1 year later, Jonathan Hayes walked slowly down the same Washington, D.C. street where everything had changed. The evening sun glinted off a small bronze plaque set into the sidewalk beside the community center. It read, "In recognition of all, victims of police misconduct and the ongoing fight for justice and equality." People paused as they passed, some snapping photos, others bowing their heads in quiet reflection. Across the street, the community center buzzed with activity. Inside, the first annual Police Accountability Summit was underway. Hayes stepped through the doors and was greeted not just by law enforcement officials, but by faces he remembered from case files, faces once humiliated, now standing tall as advocates and educators. Dr. Michael Thompson, the surgeon who had once been cuffed outside his own hospital, had founded a legal aid program for victims of misconduct. Professor James Washington was developing a cultural competency curriculum, now used in police academies. Attorney David Johnson, whose daughters once cried as they watched him handcuffed, had joined a national task force for police reform. The results of the past year were undeniable. Force incidents in reform departments had dropped by 52%. Civilian complaints were down nearly 60%. Most importantly, surveys showed community trust inching upward in neighborhoods that had long turned their backs on police. As Hayes took the stage, applause filled the auditorium. The reform wasn't perfect, the work wasn't finished, but the progress was real, and for the first time in years, the air in that room carried more hope than anger. The street outside looked unchanged, but the system had shifted. And for those who had lived the consequences of misconduct, change was finally visible, not in words, but in action. Jonathan Hayes stood at the podium, his gaze sweeping across the crowded summit hall. "Justice requires vigilance," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "It isn't a destination we arrive at once. It's a responsibility we protect every day, through accountability, through courage, and through refusing to stay silent when others are silenced." Applause rose, steady and sustained. Afterward, Hayes stepped outside into the cool evening air. Across the street, a young boy stood with his mother, reading the bronze plaque aloud. His voice was clear, innocent, unburdened by fear. When his eyes lifted to Hayes, he smiled, open, trusting, and unafraid. For Hayes, that single smile meant more than any policy passed. As he walked to his car, his phone buzzed. A message from his daughter lit the screen. "Saw your speech online. Proud of you, Dad." Hayes allowed himself the faintest smile before tucking the phone away. The fight wasn't over, but progress had a face, a future. Narrator. When you see injustice, document it. When you witness misconduct, share it. When systems fail, demand changes. Because democracy only works when citizens defend it. Your voice matters. Your courage matters. And together, we can change everything. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories of accountability and hope.